Welcome to the second thing that you need to understand about indexing. Once you understand what an index is and how it works, immediately the question pops up, well, wait a minute. How do I know when to use these things if they can be so good and so bad at the same time? And of course, I'm referring to the Understanding Indexes video here. If you haven't seen that, you may want to go take a look at that and then come back. But let's talk about some general, and underscore that word general, indexing guidelines. First of all, understand two basic premises. Indexes on a table generally, notice that word again, make data retrieval faster and more efficient. So data retrieval gets faster and more efficient. Indexes make data modification slower and less efficient. Now we could really stop right here. Of course I'm not going to, but we could stop right here and leave it at that. If you need to make your data retrieval faster and more efficient, build some indexes. If you are concerned about your data modifications being slower and less efficient, don't build indexes. But let's drill into it just a little bit here. First of all, so when should I create an index? Generally, the best way to know if you need an index is to take a look at your Transact SQL statements that are being executed against the database, and only create indexes on columns that are frequently used in the where clause. So if you see a bunch of, select whatever from, the authors table where the author's last name is equal to or is like whatever, then you need to do an index on that last name, because if we can put them in index order, it can search them a lot more efficiently. So watch the where clause. Only create indexes on columns that have a high number of unique values. Let me stop here before I say anything else. Unique values meaning that most of the values are different from each other. For example, last names, most of those rows are different. But don't do indexes on yes, no, male, female, those sorts of things. These two rules, watch the where clause and only on columns that have a high number of unique values, works sometimes, usually, maybe, possibly. You need to create an index and test it. Let's go to the other side. When should we avoid indexes? If you have a small table. Now, a general rule, very general rule. If your table has less than 8,000 rows in SQL Server 2005, 2008, you shouldn't create an index, because SQL Server can see the table well enough in memory to just sort it and do what it needs to do. If your column values are not highly unique, what's the point of indexing 1,000,000 rows when 600,000 of them say female and 400,000 say male, or vice versa? What's the point if half of them say yes and half of them say no? Will it let you create an index? Yes. Will it waste the time to update those indexes? Yes. Will it ever use the index to pull the data? No. So you want to be very careful on these things, and don't build an index on columns that get frequently updated, because every time it gets updated, it has to update the index information to keep the index up to speed. Large composite indexes can be tricky, and by tricky I mean expensive in terms of the work that the database has to do to keep these indexes running smoothly and optimized and so forth. And by large composite indexes, I mean, building an index on 4 or 5 columns altogether. There can be times you can use that. We'll talk about some things like covered queries. I'll just kind of refer you out to covered queries. May talk about those a little bit later. But understand on all of these guidelines that these are generalities, and these are really rules made to be broken. Now, the real dirty little secret is that when you create an index, the SQL Server is going to determine whether it's going to use it or not. And there is a tool called the Index Tuning Wizard that your administrator knows about and can help you with. And you can actually run the database, a SQL Profiler, capture some data, look at the queries that were run, and then run the Index Tuning Wizard and let it look at that data you captured with the profiler. And it will tell you, based on what just happened, here are the indexes I used, here are the ones I didn't use, and here's one that I would have used, and it would have helped me had you had it. And it will actually help you build and make some of these changes. So that's the Index Tuning Wizard. So you may want to take a look at that. Generally, these indexing guidelines are good. You can find a lot of information about this out on the Microsoft site, of course, out on Google, and all the bazillion sites out there on the internet and blogs and so forth. But these guidelines will help you get started. But if you'll just keep it down to those two basic pieces of information, the indexes can speed up your data retrieval if SQL Server chooses to use them, and it will absolutely slow down your data modifications.